Chapter 15, Shadow Slave. Prepare for appraisal. Sunny found himself in a space between dream and reality. It was an endless black void illuminated by a myriad of stars. Between those stars, countless strings of silver light were woven into a beautiful and inconceivably complex net, forming various nexuses and constellations. It was truly breathtaking. Somehow, Sunny understood that he was seeing the inner workings of the nightmare spell. He also couldn't help but think that it looked a lot like the celestial equivalent of a neural network. If so, was the spell alive? This was a question that countless people had been asking themselves for the past few decades. The best answer they had come up with was that there was no way to know. The spell was neither alive nor dead, either sentient nor mindless. It was more of a function than a creature. But Sunny was in no mood to ponder philosophical questions. He was eagerly awaiting his boon. The spell was still appraising his performance. However, the first reward had nothing to do with it. You have received a memory, Puppeteer's Shroud. Yes. Sunny felt incredibly elated. He was almost ready to do a happy dance. That memory belonged to Mountain King, who was an awakened tyrant. Which meant that the memory itself was of the awakened rank. Getting it was a stroke of incredible luck. There were 7 ranks to everything in the spell. These ranks were, in order of growing power: dormant, awakened, ascended, transcendent, supreme, sacred, and divine. With the exclusion of nightmare creatures, who were ranked as dormant, awakened, fallen, corrupted, great, cursed, and unholy. From the spell's point of view, Sunny was a dormant human. Having a memory of a higher rank than his own soul core would be of great help once he enters the dream realm. The power gap between different ranks simply could not be overestimated. He wanted to take a look at the Puppeteer's Shroud, but there was no more time. The spell was done with its appraisal. Here in the void, its voice didn't sound subtle and familiar anymore. Rather, it seemed like the universe itself was speaking. Sunny held his breath, listening. Aspirant, your trial is over. A nameless slave ascended the Black Mountain. Both heroes and monsters fell by his hand. Unbroken, he entered the ruined temple of a long-forgotten god and spilled his blood on the sacred altar. The gods were dead, and yet they listened. You have defeated a dormant beast, Mountain King's larva. You have defeated 3 dormant humans, names unknown. You have defeated an awakened human, Oro of the 9. You have defeated an awakened tyrant, Mountain King. You have received the Shadow God's blessing. You have achieved the impossible. Final appraisal, glorious. Your treachery truly knows no bounds. That final part was not really necessary, as far as Sunny was concerned, but he was still pretty satisfied with the praise from the spell. He felt like his chances of evolving his aspect to an awakened, or even ascended one were pretty high. His overall power was still dependent on the rank of his soul core, which would remain dormant until much later, but the rank of the aspect itself would do wonders for his overall potential. Dreamer Sunless, receive your boon. He was an aspirant no more. Sunny grinned. You have been bestowed a true name, Lost from Light. His jaw dropped. A true name. He had received a true name. Never in his wildest dreams did Sunny dream of becoming one of the chosen few to accomplish such feat. And in his very first nightmare to boot. Not even all of the saints could boast of having one. He was an elite now, a bona fide cream of the crop. He was going to be rich. But the rewards kept coming. Your aspect is ready to evolve. Evolve aspect? What kind of a question is that? Sonny crossed his fingers and said yes. Dormant aspect temple slave is evolving. New aspect acquired. Aspect rank divine. Sonny fell over. Aspect name, shadow slave. Divine, it's divine. Sonny was standing on his knees stupefied. The shock was so great that for a second there he lost all control over his limbs and fell. It said divine, right? He raised a trembling hand and rubbed his eyes, making sure that he was awake. Or rather conscious, since technically, he was still sleeping in the underground vault of the police station. Confused by all this terminology, Sonny silently summoned the runes and found the lines describing his aspect. Aspect, shadow slave. Aspect rank, divine. Aspect description. You are a miraculous shadow left behind by a dead god. As a divine shadow, you possess plenty of strange and wondrous powers. However, your existence is empty and lonesome. You mourn the passing of your former master and long to find a new one. Innate ability, shadow bond. Ability description. It is improper for a shadow, let alone a divine one, to walk around without a master. That was a lot to digest. First of all, Sonny felt his heart beating faster. He heard it right. All the suffering and horror he had experienced in the first nightmare paid off in the end. A divine aspect, he had received a divine aspect. Anything above awakened was rare and immensely valuable. People with ascended aspects were rare enough to be fought over by various factions. The factions themselves were built around singular powerhouses with transcendent or supreme aspects. And he had never, ever heard of anyone acquiring a divine one. Never. Anything with the divine prefix was so hard to find that it mostly lived in the realm of myths and legends. After all, the human race had not reached that high yet. It was only slightly more than a decade since humans managed to finally conquer the third nightmare and receive the ability to evolve their cores to transcendent rank. As transcendents, or saints, as they were called in the real world. Powerful awakened ruled over the dream realm, but even they did not dare to face nightmare creatures of higher ranks. Subsequently, there were not a lot of memories and echoes of supreme rank around, let alone sacred, or divine. The same went for aspects. And yet Sonny just got one. He grinned, driven half-mad by joy and arrogance. However, his jubilation was a little muddied. After all, there was that weird innate ability. Of course, he had no intention of becoming someone's magical slave, with no free will of his own. To hell with that. But it wasn't that bad. All he had to do to avoid that fate was to conceal his true name. No one except for him could see his status. That meant that Sonny just had to keep his mouth shut, and no one will know that he even had one. It meant giving up on all the benefits that someone who was bestowed a true name after the first nightmare was entitled to. But it all paled in comparison with the divine aspect. Not a problem, Sonny thought with a smirk. If the spell had the ability to laugh, It would surely do so after hearing his thoughts. However, it didn't. Instead, it began to speak again. The first seal is broken. Awakening dormant powers. Chapter 16, Rebirth. Sunny felt something waking up inside of him. With a startled cry, he clutched his chest and stared into the darkness, trying to understand what was happening. The feeling was not painful or unpleasant, yet it was like nothing he had ever experienced. It was as though his soul was being shaken awake, infused with strange new energy. However, that energy did not come from some outside source. Rather, it was coming from within, as though it had always been there, sleeping. The energy filled every fiber of his being. Sunny felt his emotions becoming clearer and sharper. Then, his body began to change, too. He felt as though a miniature star was burning in the center of his chest. Waves of heat were radiating from it, slowly reaching his stomach and shoulders, then his arms and legs, then his hands and feet. Under that heat, his bones, muscles, organs, and blood vessels were being rebuilt and revitalized. Sunny felt like he was being reborn. He was becoming stronger, faster, healthier. It was euphoric. With each second, his transformation was becoming more profound. New confidence settled in Sunny's heart. He was not a weak, frail street kid anymore. He was not as vulnerable against anyone who would wish to bully him as he was in the past. With his powers awakened and his will tempered by the horrors of the first nightmare, he was now someone you would not want to cross. After some time had passed, the star burning in his chest finally cooled down. The heat was replaced with a soothing coldness. That coldness washed over Sunny's body, taking away all the aches and discomforts that had been accumulated there over the years. Then it moved up, reaching his brain and finally his eyes. His vision strangely doubled. He could still see the void populated by an endless pattern of stars. But he could also see something different. A silent, calm dark sea illuminated by a lonely black sun. From his previous knowledge, Sunny knew that this was his so-called Sea of Soul. But he also knew that it was supposed to look quite different. For starters, it was supposed to be much more lively. The star hanging above, the visual representation of his soul core, was supposed to be burning with bright light, filling the soul sea with a warm, blinding shining. However, Sunny's soul was dark and lightless. That's strange. He took a look at the black sun. At a closer examination, it actually turned out to be transparent. It's just that with no other major source of light around, the star had appeared to be as dark as its surroundings. Also, no one was supposed to be here except for him. It was his soul, after all. But Sunny had a nagging feeling that somewhere just beyond the periphery of his vision, hidden in the darkness, shapeless forms were constantly moving. No matter how he turned his head, he couldn't catch a clear glimpse of them. And yet the feeling would not go away. Not wishing to waste any more time on this right now, Sunny turned back to the black sun and finally spotted two spheres of light orbiting around it, as though caught in the soul core's gravity well. A subtle smile appeared on his face. These were his memories. Silver Bell and Jupiter's Shroud. Later there would be dozens of such spheres here. If he was lucky, he would even acquire an echo or two. The spell's voice suddenly pulled him out of the Sea of Soul. Awakening aspect ability. This is it. The moment of truth, Sunny thought. Divine aspect or not, his immediate future still depended on the first aspect ability he would receive. His role in the dream realm would be based on its characteristics. If it was a combat ability, he would be most useful on the front lines of the bloody battles against the nightmare creatures. If it was tied to sorcery, he would likely become a powerful, but fragile ranged fighter. If it was something having to do with utility, he would be a vitally important part of the behind-the-scenes workings of the dream realm. Utility abilities were also extremely valued in the real world, where Awakened performed many tasks that kept it going. If he was lucky, he could even become a healer. Healers were very rare, and as such sought after specialists. Aspect ability acquired. Aspect ability name, Shadow Control. Sunny hurriedly summoned the runes. He wanted to go to the description of his new ability right away, but then decided to give his overall information a look first. Name, Sunless. True name, Lost from Light. Rank, Dreamer. Shadow Core, Dormant. Shadow Fragments, 12/1000. What? What is that? Where the rank of his soul core was supposed to be written, a mysterious shadow core appeared instead. Sunny looked at it, blinking. He had never heard of anyone having a different kind of core before. Was he that unique? This enigmatic shadow core would certainly explain why his sea of soul looked so strange. And also, he moved his eyes down, noticing the shadow fragments counter. Usually, there was supposed to be an indicator of the number of soul shards consumed. However, it was nowhere to be seen. Do I actually have a completely different progression path than all Awakened? The idea was as exciting as it was frightening. Not having to fight for resources with anybody else was an incredible advantage. Most of the human society in the dream realm was built around the acquisition of soul shards. If he had no need to gather them to evolve, not only would he be able to become more powerful with incredible speed, he would also be completely self-sufficient. On the other hand, he had no idea how to acquire these shadow fragments. However, he had gotten 12 of them somehow already, so whatever it was that he had to do, he had already done it in the first nightmare. I'll have to explore this carefully. Satisfied with this decision, Sunny continued to study the runes. Memories, Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud. Echoes. Attributes, Fated, Mark of Divinity, Child of Shadows. Aspect, Shadow Slave. Aspect rank, Divine. Aspect abilities, Shadow Control. Aspect ability description, your shadow is more independent than most. It is an invaluable helper. What is that supposed to mean? Sunny held his breath and began to read the description again, but at that moment, a new set of runes appeared just below it. Simultaneously, the spell's voice resounded in the black void. All power has a price. You have received a flaw. Your flaw is... Sunny read the runes, and his eyes widened in horror. Oh no. No.